Freedom stitched in promises, the rope hung empty, and the sun cleared the trees. Lena stood barefoot in the yard dirt, her fist closed tight around the yellow ribbon Mama tied in her hair before she was sold away 3 summers past. The crowd quarter families, stable hands, field workers, children clinging to their mothers' skirts had been ordered to watch at daybreak. Master Whitmore's law, enforced by his overseer Crawford, demanded witnesses to every execution. Death was meant to teach the living. Now Crawford waved them back toward the cabins with a hard sweep of his arm, his face flushed red from the morning heat and his own rage. Dead by law, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. Bury him quiet before noon. No talk, no gatherings, no hymns. Anyone caught speaking of this answers to me personally, but Lena had counted. She counted everything, always had, since she was small enough to hide under Mama's skirt. Numbers were her anchor in a world that shifted like sand. The rope had pulled taut at 16 seconds past the bell. The man Isaac, the carpenter who carved towboats for the quarter children, who'd fixed the chapel door last winter, who taught young Thomas how to measure wood by hand, had dropped still at 41 seconds. His body had swayed in the morning breeze, a sight that made grown men turn away and women press handkerchiefs to their mouths. Now, 3 minutes and 12 seconds later, his body lay on the wagon boards, covered with a rough burlap cloth, and no one had touched his wrist to confirm what everyone assumed. No one had checked for the final signs. Lena stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. Crawford's boots scraped the dirt in warning. "Curl," I said. "Move. You deaf as well as useless?" Lena looked at the body, ignoring the overseer's threat. She'd learned long ago that some risks were worth taking if you moved with purpose rather than fear. Isaac's fingers were slack, not curled into the tight fists of death she'd seen on other bodies. His neck sat wrong, clearly broken or severely damaged, but his cheek, where the early morning lamplight caught it through the trees, still held color. No wax pallor yet, no stiffness in the jaw, no settling of the features that came when life truly departed. Old Bo, the stable hand who taught her to count horse gaits by ear, to measure time by the rhythm of hoofbeats, caught her eye from across the wagon. His weathered face remained impassive, but his brow lifted just once, a signal only she would recognize. He'd seen it too. Whatever Isaac was, he wasn't fully dead. Not yet. Crawford shouted again, his voice rising with impatience. "I won't repeat myself. Back to your cabins, all of you. Work assignments begin in 1 hour. Anyone late gets 10 lashes." The crowd shuffled away, heads down, shoulders bent under the weight of what they'd witnessed. Lena slipped the yellow ribbon from her hair, feeling its familiar texture between her fingers, the last physical connection to Mama, and tucked it carefully in her pocket. Then she followed the others toward the quarter, her pulse tapping fast beneath her ribs, but her feet staying even on the dirt path, her breathing controlled and measured. She had learned long ago, watching and listening and surviving. Panic makes noise. Stillness buys time, and time, she was beginning to understand, was something Isaac might still have. The quarter was a collection of rough cabins arranged in 2 neat rows, each structure housing multiple families in cramped conditions that bred both closeness and conflict. Lena shared her cabin with Aunt Hester, the midwife, and 2 other families, the Washingtons and the Prices. 14 people in a space meant for 6. By midday, after 3 hours of work in the main house kitchen where Lena scrubbed pots until her hands bled, the dogs were chained near the smokehouse. She could hear them from where she worked, their occasional barks and growls carrying across the yard. Crawford had ordered Isaac's body kept in the smokehouse loft overnight, away from the chapel, away from witnesses, away from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions or offer prayers that contradicted the official narrative. Lena heard him tell the guard stationed nearby, his voice clear and cold. "No hymns. No candles, no visitors. Lock it and leave. I'll deal with the burial myself tomorrow after I've spoken with Master Whitmore." She sat on the cabin step after her work was done, still wearing her stained apron, and hummed low, just under her breath. The tune was a lullaby Mama used to sing, the one that made crying babies quiet in 3 notes, the one that seemed to carry some inexplicable power over both animals and restless children. Lena's gift had always been pitch perfect, unwavering, the kind that could match a church bell's tone or calm a spooked horse in seconds. She didn't know why she possessed this ability. She only knew it worked, had always worked, and had saved her from punishment more than once. A well-timed hum had soothed Master Whitmore's crying infant daughter. Aunt Hester, the midwife whose knowledge of herbs and healing had saved more lives in the quarter than anyone could count, passed by with a bundle of dried plants wrapped in cloth. She paused near the cabin's step, glanced toward the smokehouse where the dogs lay chained, then looked down at Lena with eyes that had seen 60 years of survival. "You planning something foolish, child?" Hester's voice was barely above a whisper. Lena shook her head, keeping her face neutral. "Just sitting, Aunt Hester." "Just resting after kitchen work," Hester snorted, a sound that mixed disbelief with grudging respect. Sitting with a hum that could put a hound to sleep and probably lull the devil himself into a nap, she crouched low beside Lena, her joints creaking, her voice dropping even further. "If you go, and I suspect you will because you're your mama's daughter through and through, you take Bo with you. And you keep that pitch steady. Don't let fear shake your voice." Lena nodded once, a small movement that sealed an unspoken pact. Hester stood with effort, adjusting the bundle in her arms. "I'll prepare what might be needed. Warm cloths, tinctures, steam herbs. Just in case your foolishness has any merit to it." She paused, looking toward the main house. "Crawford's watching everything right now. You wait until his attention shifts. He'll check on Master Whitmore before nightfall. The master took ill this morning. Whole house is whispering about it. That's when you move." At dusk, the bells rang curfew across the plantation, their deep tones marking the boundary between permitted movement and punishable trespass. Lena waited in her cabin, listening to the sounds of the quarter settling into evening conversations dying down, children being called inside, the scrape of doors closing, the occasional cough or cry of an infant. She watched through the small window as the overseer's lamplight moved from the quarter toward the main house, exactly as Hester had predicted. Crawford walked with purpose, his silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Master Whitmore's illness had clearly worsened if Crawford was being summoned after dark. Lena slipped across the yard, keeping to the shadows cast by the old oak trees that lined the path. Bo met her by the largest oak, his face shadowed by the growing darkness, his expression unreadable. "You sure about this?" he whispered, his voice gravelly with age and doubt. "Crawford catches us, we hang alongside Isaac, or worse. He's not stiff yet, Bo. I saw him." "You saw him? That means something," Bo grunted, a sound that acknowledged truth without embracing optimism. "Dogs won't like us being out here. Especially not near the smokehouse. They will if I hum, you know they will." She started the hymn again, low and even, letting it carry across the yard like something natural, a night bird's call. The wind through leaves, a sound that belonged to darkness rather than standing out against it. The dog's ears flicked toward the sound. One whined softly, uncertain. Then it settled, laying its massive head on its paws. The other two followed suit, their bodies relaxing as the melody worked its strange magic on their aggressive natures. Bo shook his head in quiet wonder, his eyes reflecting the distant lamplight from the main house. "Your mama had that same gift, used to sing the master's horses calm during thunderstorms. Never seen anything like it before or since." He motioned her forward with one weathered hand. "Let's move before Crawford comes back." The smokehouse loft door was barred from the outside with a heavy wooden plank. Bo lifted the latch slow, letting the hinge creak just once, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, then pulled it wide. Lamplight from the guard's distant post barely touched the opening, leaving the interior wrapped in deep shadow. Lena climbed the ladder first, still humming, her breath tight in her chest but her pitch clean and unwavering. The loft smelled of hickory smoke and old meat, of salt and thyme. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness. Isaac lay on a plank table in the center of the small space, a rough wool blanket pulled to his chin. Someone, probably the guard, following orders, had arranged him with a semblance of dignity, his arms straight at his sides, his head positioned to hide the worst of the rope damage. Lena set her hand near his wrist, not quite touching, just hovering close enough to sense what might be there. Warmth, faint, like the last coals of a dying fire, but present, definitely present. She leaned closer, counting seconds in her head with the same precision she counted everything, watching his chest with focused intensity. At 19 seconds, it rose, just slightly. Barely perceptible, but it rose. Bo's breath caught audibly behind her. "Lord have mercy on us all." Lena pressed two fingers to Isaac's neck, searching for the pulse point Aunt Hester had once shown her while teaching the basics of midwifery. The pulse was thin, scattered, irregular like a bird's heart after a cat scare, fast and weak and struggling. She shifted her hum to a lullaby tempo, slower, steadier, more deliberate, the kind Mama used when a baby's breathing came too fast, when fever threatened or fear gripped too tight. Gradually, miraculously, Isaac's chest began to match the rhythm she set. His breathing deepened fractionally. "Get Hester," Lena whispered without looking away from Isaac's face. "And bring those warm cloths and tinctures," she mentioned. Quickly, Bo hesitated at the top of the ladder, his loyalty warring with fear. "If Crawford comes back before I return, he's alive. Bo, we can't let him die. True, now that we know, we can't bear that burden." "Get Hester," Bo nodded and descended the ladder with surprising speed for his age, his footsteps fading quickly into the night. Lena kept the lullaby going, barely breathing between phrases, her eyes fixed on Isaac's face in the dim light. His eyelids twitched slightly, his fingers curled, just a fraction of an inch. The signs of returning life were subtle, unmistakable to anyone watching closely enough. She didn't stop humming, didn't shift the tempo even slightly. Outside, boots scraped the dirt a guard on his rounds, making his circuit of the property. Lena's pulse jumped, spiking with adrenaline, but she forced her pitch to hold steady. The Dobbs remained quiet, still under the spell of her voice. The guard paused directly outside the smokehouse door. Lena could see his shadow through the gap in the boards, could hear his breathing, could sense his attention focusing on the building. He stood there, listening to the night sounds, trying to determine if anything was amiss. She kept the note low, steady, woven seamlessly into the ambient sounds: cricket chirp, wind rustling through the eaves, the distant call of an owl hunting in the fields. After 12 long seconds that felt like 12 hours, the guard moved on, his boots crunching on gravel as he continued his patrol. Lena exhaled slowly through her nose and raised the pitch just slightly, a gentle lift that seemed to encourage Isaac's breathing. His chest rose and fell with increasing regularity. Aunt Hester arrived with Bo within minutes, moving faster than seemed possible for a woman of her years. She carried a clay pot of herb-infused steam and a stack of cloths that had been warming near someone's hearth. She climbed the ladder with practiced efficiency, set the pot carefully on the rough floor, and immediately pressed a warm cloth to Isaac's throat. "Rope burn," she muttered, her fingers probing gently around the injury. "Didn't crush the windpipe or break the spine clean through, that's why he's still breathing. But the blood flow was choked, starved the brain. We need to keep him warm, keep circulation moving, and keep him absolutely still while the body heals itself." She glanced at Lena with something like pride in her tired eyes. "Keep that hum going, child. It's holding him on this side of the veil. I can feel it working on him." Lena nodded, not trusting herself to speak without disrupting the rhythm. Hester worked with the efficiency of decades of experience. Warm cloth supplied systematically to Isaac's neck and chest, herb steam held near his face to ease breathing, a pungent tincture rubbed into his chest with circular motions. Isaac's color deepened from the gray pallor of near-death to something closer to living brown. His pulse, which Lena monitored constantly with her fingertips, grew stronger and more regular under her touch. By the time the moon cleared the roof of the smokehouse, casting silver light through the gaps in the boards, Isaac's eyes cracked open. Just slits at first, confused and unfocused. Then wider, taking in the faces hovering above him. He tried to speak. His mouth moved but no sound emerged except a rough wheeze. Hester pressed a gentle hand to his chest. "Not yet, Isaac, don't try. Just breathe. Just stay with us and breathe." Lena let the lullaby soften gradually, then fade to silence. Isaac's gaze found hers in the lamplight, recognition sparked in his eyes. He blinked once, deliberately, acknowledgement, gratitude, understanding all compressed into that single gesture. She nodded and slipped the yellow ribbon from her pocket, the one Mama had tied in her hair so long ago, and tied it carefully around Isaac's wrist, not tight, just secure enough to stay. "So we remember," she whispered. "So we remember that death doesn't always win. So we remember that some things can be fought against." Bo stood at the top of the ladder, his body tense, listening for any sound of approaching danger. "We got maybe an hour before Crawford's next round. Maybe less if Master Whitmore's condition changes and Crawford comes back early. What do we do then?" Hester wiped her hands on her apron, her expression grave. "Then we pray Crawford's too busy managing the main house crisis to check on a dead man before dawn. We pray, and we prepare for what comes next." "And what comes next?" Bo pressed. Hester looked at Isaac, then at Lena. "Truth comes next. And truth is dangerous." Morning came cold and bright, the sun rising over the eastern fields in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the previous night's drama. Lena stood in the yard again, this time opally, holding a tin cup of water drawn from the well. The quarter families gathered slowly, uncertainly, drawn by rumors that had spread through whispers in the pre-dawn darkness. Crawford's orders had been explicit and threatening. No gathering, no talk, no acknowledgement of yesterday's execution. The word had spread anyway, the way it always did in the quarter, passing from cabin to cabin in hushed tones. The dead man breathed. The hanged man lived. The impossible had occurred. At first light, Bo opened the smokehouse loft door wide, flooding the space with morning sun. Isaac sat up on his own, his movements shaky and uncertain but undeniably alive. His hand went to his throat, touching the bandage Hester had wrapped there. He reached for the cup Lena offered, his voice emerging as a painful rasp. "Water, please." The crowd saw him, they heard him speak. Shock rippled through the assembly like wind through dry corn stalks, visible, audible, transforming the very air. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs turned to exclamations. Several people shouted in astonishment. A woman near the back began to weep. Crawford stormed across the yard from the main house, his face red with fury and confusion, his hand instinctively going to the whip at his belt. "Silence, all of you! Silence this instant!" But the murmurs didn't stop, they grew louder. A woman pointed with a trembling hand, a man crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. Old Martha, who'd lived through more than anyone should have to endure, fell to her knees. Crawford's jaw tightened until muscles bulged visibly. "Witch talk," he spat, his voice venomous with rage and fear. "Devil's work. I'll burn every Bible and quilt that feeds this lie. I'll destroy every scrap of superstition in this quarter." He turned to the guards who had gathered at the commotion. "Release the dogs at dusk. Anyone caught spreading stories about miracles or resurrections answers to me personally. 20 lashes minimum." Lena stepped back into the crowd, her hand instinctively closing around the yellow ribbon still tied to Isaac's wrist. She'd forgotten to remove it in the chaos. The danger had shifted, transformed. Isaac was alive, yes, but now the truth itself had become a target. Their act of mercy had created a crisis Crawford couldn't control through normal means. By noon, the main house had erupted into chaos that could be heard even in the distant fields. Master Whitmore, a man already crushed by mounting debts and 3 consecutive years of failed crops, had collapsed in his study after hearing the news about Isaac. The household erupted into panicked activity. Servants ran back and forth, the mistress wailed in her chambers. Children were sent to their rooms. The doctor was away in Richmond, wouldn't return for 3 days. His assistant, a nervous young man named Caleb who'd apprenticed for less than a year, was sent for urgently. He arrived pale and visibly unsure, carrying a leather bag that seemed too heavy for his trembling hands. Lena stood near the doorway of the study, holding a silver tray of water that no one had specifically requested but that gave her a legitimate reason to be present. She watched through the partially open door as Caleb fumbled with various jars and packets, his hands shaking badly enough to rattle the glass containers. Master Whitmore gasped from his chair, his face ashen, his chest heaving with irregular breaths. "The tonic, fetch the heart tonic quickly, Bo." Caleb grabbed frantically at the wrong jar, nearly dropping it. His panic was making the situation worse. Lena's memory flashed back sharply. She'd been in this room once before, sent to clean, after the doctor's last visit. She'd overheard the doctor instructing Caleb, reading a medicine label aloud in Latin to help the young man learn. Digitalis purpurea, foxglove, for regulating the heart rhythm in cases of distress. She set the tray down with deliberate care and stepped forward through the doorway, knowing she was violating protocol, unable to watch a man die from incompetence. "Third jar, left shelf, purple label with the gold lettering." Caleb stared at her, his mouth falling open. "How do you, a slave girl, can't possibly? I heard the doctor read it once, just once, 6 weeks ago. Third jar, left shelf, purple label, digitalis." He grabbed the jar she'd indicated, read the label with widening eyes, then measured out the dose with slightly steadier hands. Lena watched Master Whitmore's breathing pattern, then began to hum low, steady, establishing a calming rhythm that she'd seen work on agitated patients during Hester's treatments. Master Whitmore's desperate gasps gradually slowed. His clenched hand opened. Color began returning to his lips. Caleb looked at her with pure astonishment. "You know medicine. How is that possible?" "I know memory. And I know breathing patterns. And Hester taught me some. The rest I learned by watching and listening." Master Whitmore's breathing stabilized further. He slumped back in his chair, exhausted but clearly stable now, no longer in immediate danger. After a long, tense moment, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Lena. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "Fetch the clerk. Right now." Crawford, who had been standing in the hallway observing with his characteristic scowl, stepped forward immediately. "Sir, you need rest. You shouldn't be making decisions in this condition." "Fetch him," Whitmore repeated, his voice weak but carrying absolute authority. "And bring me the estate Bible and the quilts from the upper storage. Bring them all down." Lena felt something shift in the room, an atmospheric change, like pressure dropping before a storm. Something fundamental had broken open in Master Whitmore's thinking. That afternoon, Crawford made his threat devastatingly real. He gathered all the quarter families in the yard under the blazing sun and pointed dramatically toward the small chapel that had been built 50 years earlier. "I want this understood clearly," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the assembly. "Any book, any quilt, any scrap of paper that feeds lies about miracles or resurrections, any object that encourages superstition or undermines lawful authority, I will personally burn it myself tonight, every single item." He turned slowly until his gaze fixed on Lena, standing near the back of the crowd. "And the girl who hums, the one who thinks her voice has special power. She's done working in the main house. After tonight, she works in the furthest field under the hottest sun. And after tonight, the dogs run free through the quarter. Let's see how well her humming works then." The crowd stood in frozen silence. Lena's chest tightened painfully, but she forced her face to remain still, emotionless. Showing fear now would only feed Crawford's power. Church bells began tolling across the plantation, not the regular timing bells, but in a irregular, urgent pattern. Dark clouds gathered to the west, threatening an evening storm. Reverend Pike, the circuit preacher who traveled between 3 counties and kept detailed records in the chapel basement, caught Lena's eye from the edge of the crowd. He gave a single, deliberate nod, then turned and walked quickly toward the chapel. Lena understood immediately. If evidence existed, real, documented evidence that could challenge Crawford's authority, it would be stored there in Pike's carefully maintained records. And if Crawford was planning to burn everything, she had until nightfall to save what mattered. The chapel basement smelled strongly of old wood, aging paper, and candle wax accumulated over decades. Reverend Pike opened a large wooden trunk in the corner while Bo stood watch at the door, his body positioned to block casual observers. Inside the trunk, quilts of various sizes, leather-bound ledgers, stacks of letters tied with string, and various documents wrapped in oilcloth. Pike unfolded a particular quilt with reverent care, running his fingers along the binding stitches. This one was sewn by the original Whitmore family 30 years back, 1795, to be exact. It's called an oath quilt, promises stitched into fabric so they couldn't be forgotten or denied. Physical proof of verbal contracts. Lena leaned close, studying the intricate stitching pattern. The design shifted noticeably at one corner, date, 1795, worked meticulously into the fabric with thread that had darkened with age. She'd heard that specific date mentioned before, spoken aloud during a property reading in the yard 2 months ago, when legal papers were being reviewed. Her memory locked onto it instantly, connecting this quilt to that document. "That's the year Master Whitmore's father made a binding promise," she said with certainty, "about manumission for enslaved people if certain debts were paid. I heard it mentioned once during that property reading." Pike's eyes widened with something between surprise and hope. "You remember a specific date from a reading you heard once, 2 months ago?" "I remember everything I hear clearly. Once is always enough. Numbers, dates, names, exact phrases, they stay with me." Pike pulled a leather-bound ledger from the trunk with shaking hands. A faded green ribbon marked a specific page. Lena touched the ribbon, instinctively green thread, aged and fragile, with a wax seal pressed into the corner. The seal was slightly crooked, she noticed, as if pressed in haste. Thunder rolled across the sky outside, deep and threatening. Rain began to tap against the chapel roof in scattered drops that would soon become a downpour. Pike closed the trunk carefully. "The river bridge won't survive this storm. I've seen these clouds before. If you're taking this evidence to town, to the courthouse, you need to go immediately. Right now." Lena looked at Bo, seeing her own fear and determination reflected in his weathered face. He nodded once. They wrapped the quilt and ledger carefully in oilcloth to protect against the coming rain, secured the bundle with cord, and ran into the gathering storm. The river had already begun to swallow the bridge by the time they reached the northern bank. Brown water churned violently over the wooden pilings, dragging broken branches and narrow staves downstream with terrifying force. Lena stood at the water's edge, rain already soaking through her thin dress, the oilcloth bundle pressed tightly to her chest like a shield. Bo pointed across the turbulent water to the far bank. The ferry's the only possible way across now. Bridge is already too dangerous. The ferry was a wide flat barge, sturdy enough to carry a full wagon with horses, pulled across by a silent boatman named Tiller who asked no questions if you had proper documentation. The passes were always checked by patrollers, and patrollers worked directly for men exactly like Crawford. Mrs. Harrow, a Quaker woman known throughout the county for selling eggs and butter in town, while quietly helping people in ways she never discussed openly, waited under the spreading branches of a cedar tree near the ferry landing. She waved them over urgently. "River's rising faster than I've ever seen," she said, her usually calm voice tight with concern. "Patrols have doubled since this morning. Word is spreading about what happened at the Whitmore plantation. They're actively looking for runaways and anyone they consider troublemakers." She glanced meaningfully at Lena. "You'll need a believable story." "A very good one." Lena pulled the yellow ribbon from her pocket, the one from Mama, now tied carefully with a red wax seal she'd found among the chapel documents. "We're delivering binding papers for Reverend Pike. Official church business regarding estate matters." Mrs. Harrow studied the ribbon closely, then the seal, then Lena's face. She nodded slowly. "That might work. The appearance of church authority carries weight. But don't hesitate or stumble if they question you. Confidence sells lies better than any document." The ferry pole loomed through the thickening fog and rain. Tiller, a massively built man with arms like oak limbs and a face that betrayed no emotion ever, gestured them aboard with one thick hand. Two other passengers, a weathered farmer and his teenage son, sat huddled near the front of the barge, trying to stay dry under a piece of canvas. Lena and Bo took the back corner, the precious bundle hidden carefully under Bo's worn coat, both of them trying to appear casual despite racing pulses. Halfway across the swollen river, with water lapping dangerously close to the barge's edge, a patroller hailed them from the far bank. His voice cut through the rain. Tiller slowed the barge's progress, water streaming off the pole. "Passes," the patroller demanded sharply, stepping to the very edge of the landing. "Everyone shows passes now." Mrs. Harrow, who'd crossed with them, handed hers over first with practiced ease. The patroller barely glanced at it before waving her through. Then his attention focused entirely on Lena and Bo. "What's your business crossing in this other?" Lena held up the ribbon, keeping her hand steady through sheer force of will. "Church binding papers for Reverend Pike, estate documents requiring official delivery." The patroller's eyes narrowed suspiciously. He leaned closer, studying the wax seal. "That seal's red. Pike's church seals are always green. I've seen them myself." Lena's heart slammed against her ribs, but her voice remained perfectly even. "This particular seal is from the vault documents. Special prayers and binding oaths use the old red seal according to church tradition. It was a complete fabrication, but delivered with such calm certainty that doubt flickered across the patroller's face." He reached toward the ribbon, as if to examine it more closely. Lena's mind raced desperately. She'd seen Pike's real seal once, pressed into green wax, with a distinctive cross and vine pattern. This red seal was completely plain, unmarked, obviously wrong to anyone who looked carefully. She'd made a critical mistake, but the patroller hesitated, his hand stopping inches from the ribbon. He glanced back toward his partner on the shore, then at the rapidly rising water that already lapped at the ferry's edge. If he delayed the crossing much longer to investigate thoroughly, and the river took the ferry, he would have to answer personally for the loss of Tiller's livelihood and potentially lives. The practical concern outweighed his suspicion. He stepped back and waved them through with obvious reluctance. "Go on. Move." Lena didn't exhale until the ferry scraped against the far bank and Tiller secured it. Bo helped her onto the muddy landing, his hand shaking noticeably. "You lied directly about that wax," he whispered urgently once they were out of the patroller's earshot. "I told the exact truth about the color," Lena countered quietly. "He didn't ask about the pattern or origin. He only confirmed color, and I answered that question honestly." Mrs. Harrow laid them quickly up the muddy bank toward town, her pace urgent. "You've got more luck than sense, child. Don't waste either one." The probate office sat behind the courthouse, a low brick building with a back room where official seals, legal documents, and estate ledgers were stored. The clerk, a precise man named Drummond who everyone said couldn't be bribed or intimidated, was supposed to be there during business hours, but when they arrived, the door stood partially open and the desk was completely empty. Caleb, Master Whitmore's doctor's assistant, met them at the side entrance. His face was pale, his movements nervous. "Drummond's gone. Took a horse north this morning at first light, right after Crawford sent him urgent word about something. No one knows exactly what was said." Lena's stomach dropped sickeningly. "Crawford got to him first. He's trying to control the documentation." Caleb nodded miserably. "But the official seals are still here in the office. And I've noticed someone's been using them recently. There's fresh wax on the desk from this morning." He led them into the back room, glancing nervously over his shoulder. On the main desk sat two heavy seal rings, one brass, one iron. Beside them, a scattered stack of papers, several with freshly pressed wax seals still slightly warm. Lena picked up the brass ring carefully and held it up to catch the lamplight, studying the impression surface. The letters were slightly malformed, the cross design shallow and imprecise. She set it down and reached for the iron ring. This one's impression matched exactly what she'd seen on the chapel quilt: deep, clean, sharp edges, the cross and vine pattern perfectly executed. "This iron one is the authentic seal," she said with certainty. "The brass is a deliberate forgery." Caleb stared at her. "How can you possibly tell just by looking? I saw the real seal's impression once on that quilt. The letters sit differently, the spacing, the depth, the precision. Once you've seen the real thing clearly, the fake is obvious." A bell rang suddenly from the courthouse tower, early and urgent, not the regular schedule. Caleb rushed to the window and looked out. The public readings din moved up significantly. "Crawford's pushing everything through before anyone can organize opposition or get proper legal counsel." Lena looked intently at Bo. "We need to find the specific ledger that shows the estate debt details. And we need the exact wording of the manumission clause." Caleb pulled open a hidden drawer in the desk, one that clearly wasn't meant to be obvious. Inside lay a second ledger, smaller than the first, older, bound in cracked black leather that spoke of decades of handling. He opened it to a page marked with another faded ribbon. Lena leaned over his shoulder, reading quickly. The entry stated clearly, "Whitmore Estate double debt recorded in error. Manumission clause remains binding per sworn oath. Year 1795. She flipped carefully to the next page. A note in cramped, hurried handwriting read, "Clause void only if debt remains verifiably unpaid. Proper seal required for all documentation." Lena touched the note with one finger. "This is the proof we need. Crawford's been using the fake brass seal to forge documents saying the debt is still unpaid. That the real records, sealed properly, show it was paid off." Caleb closed the ledger with shaking hands. "We need to present this at the public reading. But if Crawford sees us coming with evidence..." A dog barked sharply outside, very close, much too close. Then another joined it. Lena grabbed the precious ledger and shoved it quickly into the oilcloth bundle with the quilt. "He released the dogs early," Bo said, his voice tight. "We have to move now." They ran through the narrow alley behind the courthouse, the dogs barking growing steadily louder and more aggressive. Lena's bare feet slipped repeatedly on wet cobblestones. Mrs. Harrow appeared suddenly from a side doorway, pulling them inside a storage shed. "Wait here and stay absolutely silent," she whispered urgently. "I'll draw the dogs away." She stepped back into the alley, calling the dogs by their individual names in a calm, authoritative voice that suggested she had every right to be managing them. The aggressive barking shifted direction, then gradually faded toward the town square. Lena pressed her forehead against the rough wooden wall, trying to catch her breath and calm her racing heart. Bo handed her the oilcloth bundle with solemn ceremony. "You're the one with perfect memory," he said quietly. "The one who can testify to what you've seen, and her. You carry the evidence." Inside the cramped shed, Caleb lit a small candle stub. Lena unwrapped the ledger again, studying the pages more carefully now that they had a moment. One entry caught her attention, a payment record marked exactly 3 months earlier, signed with a press seal impression. "This payment entry is fraudulent," she said, pointing. "Look at the date carefully. Master Whitmore was severely ill 3 months ago. I remember because I was called to help in the house. He was bedridden for 2 weeks, couldn't possibly have signed any documents. Yet this shows his signature." Caleb leaned close, nodding slowly as understanding dawned. "If we can definitively prove the seal impression is wrong, the entire debt claim falls apart legally." Lena pulled the yellow ribbon from her pocket and held it beside the question ledger entry. The wax on her ribbon was green and cleanly pressed with the iron ring's distinctive pattern. The wax on the payment record was red and shallow, obviously pressed with the brass forgery. Two different seals, two completely different stories, she said. We show them side by side, and let the evidence speak. A harsh voice cut through the wall Crawford's, loud and threatening. Search every building, every shed, every corner. That girl has stolen papers that don't belong to her. Find her before she reaches the courthouse. Lena's pulse spiked dangerously. Caleb immediately blew out the candle. Both whispered urgently, back door. Right now. They slipped through the rear exit into a narrow courtyard. Rain poured even harder now, creating a gray curtain that limited visibility. Lena clutched the bundle and followed Bo toward the stable area. The old mule stood in the corner stall, wet and clearly irritated by the weather. Lena stopped suddenly, staring at the animal. She'd dreamed of this exact mule 2 nights before, a vivid dream featuring a bent fence post, a road that curved sharply left, and the mule's distinctive ears flicking at a sound she couldn't identify in the dream. She stepped into the stall and set her hand gently on the mule's damp neck. It huffed once, then quieted under her touch. You know the way, she whispered to the animal. You were in my dream. You know where we need to go. Bo saddled the mule quickly while Caleb kept nervous watch at the door. Mrs. Harrow returned, breathing hard. Dogs are circling back this direction. You've got perhaps 5 minutes at most. Lena climbed onto the mule's broad back, the bundle tied securely to her waist with cord. Bo swung up behind her, his arms around her waist for balance. Where exactly are we going? He asked. Follow the dream, Lena said simply. Trust it. The mule stepped deliberately into the pouring rain. The road was nearly impassable, thick mud and deep ruts that would have trapped a wagon. Lena let the mule choose its own path, trusting the strange connection between her dream and this moment. After roughly a mile of careful progress, the road bent sharply left at a distinctive fence post exactly as she'd seen in her sleep. The mule's long ears flicked forward at some sound. Lena leaned forward, listening intently through the rain. Ahead, barely visible through the great downpour, the courthouse steps materialized. Bo exhaled sharply. Lord kept the way clear for us. Lena slid carefully off the mule and handed the reins to Mrs. Harrow, who'd somehow followed on foot through the mud. Get inside quickly, Harrow urged. I'll manage the doors and watch for Crawford. The courthouse yard was packed despite the terrible weather. Farmers, merchants, plantation families, townspeople. Everyone who had business or interest in the Whitmore estate proceedings had gathered. At the center of the crowd, clearly visible, Crawford stood beside a deputy, holding an official-looking stack of papers, and then Lena saw him, Isaac, alive, standing among the assembled witnesses, one hand gripping a post for physical support. The crowd murmured loudly. Some people crossed themselves. Others simply pointed and stared. Crawford's face drained of all color. That's impossible. Completely impossible. Isaac met Lena's eyes across the crowded yard and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, solidarity, and shared purpose. The living man's presence refuted Crawford's entire narrative without requiring a single word. Crawford's voice rose to a near shout, cutting across the courthouse yard. Witchcraft, sorcery. That man was legally executed and declared dead by law. This is clearly the devil's work and should be. Test the wax seals, Lena interrupted, her voice carrying clearly despite not shouting. The crowd shifted, turning toward her. Crawford spun around, his face flushed dark red. What did you say? Lena held up the yellow ribbon for everyone to see. This seal is green wax, pressed clean and deep. The papers you're holding are red wax, pressed shallow. 2 different seals mean 2 different stories. Let the physical evidence speak. A deputy stepped forward from his position near the courthouse doors, squinting. Let me examine those. Crawford jerked the papers protectively away. These are legally binding documents, properly signed by Master Whitmore himself. Then let the wax seal prove their authenticity, Lena said firmly. The crowd went completely silent, sensing drama. The deputy reached persistently for the ribbon. Lena handed it over without hesitation. He studied the wax seal carefully, turning it to catch the light, then glanced at the papers still clutched in Crawford's hand. She's absolutely right. Different color entirely. Different depth of impression. These don't match. Crawford's jaw clenched visibly, a slave child's trick. She has no legal standing to challenge. Isaac's rough voice, damaged but steady, interrupted. I'm a live van standing here. That's standing enough for any court." The crowd erupted into competing shouts. Some voices rose in support, others demanded order and proper procedure. The deputy raised his hand for silence. "Bring the official agent immediately. And locate the real county clerk, wherever he's gone. We'll settle this matter properly right now." Inside the courthouse, the air was suffocatingly thick with lamp smoke and wet wool from dozens of drenched people. The state-appointed agent, a stern man with no local loyalties to plantation owner, sat at the front table, flanked by the deputy and a clerk brought from the neighboring county specifically for impartiality. Master Whitmore was carefully carried in on a sturdy chair, still pale and weak but mentally lucid. He nodded directly to Lena as the bearers passed her position. Crawford stood rigidly to the right side of the room, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Lena stood to the left, the wrapped bundle at her feet, Isaac beside her for moral support. The agent spoke first, his voice formal and emotionless. "I've heard various accusations. Now I require examining the actual evidence." Lena unwrapped the oath quilt with careful reverence. The binding fell open, revealing the meticulously stitched date and the detailed manumission clause sewn into the corner with thread that had survived 30 years. She spread it on the table. "This quilt was created in 1795, she stated clearly. "The year Master Whitmore's father swore a binding oath to free all enslaved people on this land if the estate debt was paid in full. The terms are stitched into the fabric itself." The agent leaned over the intricate stitching, studying it closely. "I can clearly see the date. I can read the clause. Where is definitive proof of the debt payment?" Caleb stepped forward and placed the hidden ledger on the table with a soft thud. "Here, sir. Payment was properly recorded 3 months ago. That the seal used to validate the document is fraudulent." The agent opened the ledger, his eyes scanning the relevant page, then stopping abruptly. He looked up sharply at Crawford. "This seal impression is brass. The authentic Whitmore estate seal has always been iron. Every legal document for 40 years has used the iron seal." Crawford's face went rigid as stone. "That ledger itself is fraudulent. Someone planted it too." "Test them both," Lena said for the third time. "Press both seal rings into fresh wax and compare the impressions directly." The agent nodded to the deputy. "Retrieve both seal rings from the probate office immediately." The deputy returned within minutes carrying both rings, the brass forgery from the probate office desk and the iron original from the locked vault where it should have been secure. He pressed each one into fresh wax on the table, creating clear impressions side by side. The impressions sat together under lamplight. The brass impression was noticeably shallow, the letter slightly malformed and crooked. The iron impression was deep and precise, the cross and vine pattern sharp and unmistakable. The crowd, pressed tightly into the doorway and craning to see through windows, leaned forward collectively. The agent tapped the brass impression with one finger. "This is undeniably a forgery, Crew, but effective if no one thought to compare." Crawford lunged forward desperately. "You cannot possibly." The deputy stepped smoothly between them. "Sit down, overseer." Right now, Crawford sat heavily, his hands visibly shaking. Reverend Pike entered through the side door, carrying both the oath quilt and his personal Bible. He set both ceremoniously on the table and opened the Bible to a page marked with yet another ribbon. "The original oath is recorded here in the church register," Pike announced. "Signed by Master Whitmore's father and formally witnessed by 3 respected men of this county. The manumission clause is legally binding. If the debt was paid as recorded, the enslaved people must be free." The agent looked directly at Master Whitmore. "Is this truly your father's sworn oath?" Whitmore nodded weakly, his voice barely audible. "It is. I genuinely tried to honor it. The Crawford repeatedly showed me papers indicating the debt remained open. He convinced me the payment hadn't been properly recorded, that more time was needed." "Forged papers," the agent interrupted sharply. "This man used a false seal to extend a debt that was already satisfied. That constitutes fraud and theft of human lives." Crawford's mouth opened but no words emerged. Lena stepped forward once more. "There's additional evidence." She reached carefully into her pocket and pulled out a small scrap of paper, a note she discovered tucked deep in the quilt binding during her examination. It was written in the same cramped, hurried handwriting as the suspicious ledger entry. "This note explicitly states the manumission clause is void only if the debt remains unpaid, but the debt was fully paid." Crawford deliberately hid the payment record and forged documents with a brass seal to make the debt appear ongoing. The agent took the note, read it thoroughly, then set it precisely beside the ledger. This provides sufficient evidence for a formal indictment. The crowd erupted again, this time in clear approval. Isaac stepped fully into the room, his mere presence steadying the emotional atmosphere. The agent addressed him directly. "You were officially declared dead by legal process. Yet you demonstrably stand here alive. Explain this impossibility." Isaac's voice was quiet, but absolutely clear. "The hanging rope broke my breath temporarily, but not my life. These people," he gestured toward Lena, Bo, and Hester, "brought me back from the edge. I owe them literally everything." The agent nodded slowly, processing this. "Whether miracle or medicine, I cannot and will not judge, but I can definitively judge fraud." He turned to the deputy. "Arrest Crawford immediately, seize all documents in his possession, and locate the true county clerk wherever Drummond has fled to." Crawford was led out in iron shackles. The crowd parted silently to let him pass. An hour later, the real clerk stumbled exhausted into the courthouse, soaked to the skin. He'd been riding desperately through the storm, trying to reach town before Crawford could complete the fraudulent proceedings. The agent sat him down firmly, pressed the authentic iron seal. "Show us the true record from the original vault ledger." The clerk opened the vault ledger with shaking hands. The original, untouched document. He pressed the iron ring carefully into green wax and set the impression beside the brass forgery. The difference was impossible to deny. The agent stood formally. "The debt is satisfied and paid. The clause is legally binding. Master Whitmore, you face a choice. Honor your father's sworn oath immediately or face prosecution for complicity in fraud." Whitmore's hands trembled violently. He looked at Lena, then at Isaac, then at the oath quilt spread ceremoniously on the table like a banner of justice. "I'll honor it," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have done this many years ago. I was weak. I was foolish. I let Crawford manipulate me." The agent handed him a pen. "Then sign the manumission papers now, before all these witnesses." Whitmore signed the freedom papers in front of the entire assembled courthouse. The clerk carefully sealed each individual document with the iron ring, pressing the wax firm and clean. Lena watched as her own name was written in careful script. "Lena, freed this date, by lawful oath and legal witness." Isaac's name followed on the next document, then Bo's name, then Hester's name, then systematically every single name from the quarter, each person granted individual legal freedom. The agent read each name aloud in a steady voice. The crowd stood in absolute silence, bearing witness to history. When the final name was read, Reverend Pike lifted the oath quilt and draped it ceremonially over the table like a sacred banner. "This oath was originally sewn in faith 30 years ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, finally, it's honored in law." The courthouse bells rang long, clear, steady notes. Lena felt the sound resonating in her chest, the same way she felt her own perfect pitch when singing. Master Whitmore stood shakily, but with determination. "I want to establish a new arrangement. No slavery, no bonds of any kind. Fair wages paid regularly and complete freedom of movement for all." The agent nodded approvingly. "Write it formally." "I'll witness it personally." Whitmore took the pen again and wrote out the charter on fresh paper, his hands steadier now. The clerk sealed it with green wax. Pike blessed it with a formal prayer. Lena held the yellow ribbon in her hand, the one that had carried her through the storm, through fear, through everything. She tied it carefully to the quilt binding, a knot that wouldn't slip or fail. That night, they gathered on the courthouse porch. Lena, Isaac, Bo, Hester, Mrs. Harrow, Caleb, Pike, and dozens of others whose names had been read and officially sealed. The rain had finally stopped. Stars broke through the thinning clouds. Tiller arrived with his ferry, ready to transport them across the river to a Quaker settlement where housing and meaningful work awaited free people. Lena climbed aboard carefully, the precious freedom papers tucked safely inside her dress, the oath quilt folded in her arms. Isaac sat beside her, his hand steady on the pole despite his lingering weakness. Though Aunt Hester took positions at the front, the others filled the barge until it rode low in the water, but remained balanced. As the ferry pushed away from the bank, Reverend Pike called from the landing, his voice carrying across the water. "Sing, if you're able. Let your voices carry." Lena started the hymn, the same melody she'd hummed in the smokehouse loft, the one that had calmed aggressive dogs and steadied Isaac's failing breath. But this time, she didn't hum softly and alone. One by one, all the others joined their voices to hers. The song rose together, clear and unafraid and powerful, carried across the dark water like a beacon light guiding them home. The ferry pole stood planted firmly in the mud at the far bank, exactly where Lena had seen it in her prophetic dream, pointing the way to their new beginning. At dawn, they sang together loudly, no whispers now, no fear, while the lantern of hope pointed them toward home and freedom.